last year, and in French actually just released last week as both as open access. This monograph covers the Xinjiang region, its historical background, and the current conflict in much greater detail. Here today, I'm focusing on one specific aspect, namely how China is trying to stem the flow of negative reporting, accusations, and allegations of its conduct in the Xinjiang region through a very concerted and deliberate media strategy. I'll start today's presentation with a brief look at China's media and globalization in general. Then I'll introduce the methods and the data that we are using in this paper I'm presenting today. And then it goes into the analysis, which has two parts. The first part is a quantitative exercise of content analysis, where we break apart the data to see what's in there. And the second part goes a bit more in depth, is a discourse analysis, a qualitative analysis and interpretation of what it is that we're being shown on official state media via YouTube. And then I'll conclude this section on the paper that is the basis of this today's talk, but I'll also provide an outlook on more recent trends that are not yet covered in the upcoming publication. So let's get started with a view on China's media and globalization in general. The Chinese Communist Party, the governing party of the People's Republic of China, has at its highest levels determined that China is lacking what they call discourse power in the international arena, 话语权. So the leadership of Xi Jinping argues that the Chinese Communist Party needs to tell the China story well, to do a better job at telling the China story well, in order to bring across a more benign image of China. And this, at its inception, had nothing to do directly with Xinjiang, but was a very general measure. In particular, Xi Jinping issued a directive in 2014, and I quote from that, in which he said, "China should be portrayed as a civilized country featuring a rich history, ethnic unity, and cultural diversity, and as an Eastern power with good government, a developed economy, cultural prosperity, national unity, and beautiful scenery," unquote. So basically all things are well in China, and that needs to be portrayed towards the outside world using the media at its disposal. And in particular, in order to make this more efficacious, China also founded and set up a new conglomerate, the China Global Television Network, or CGTN, as its media outreach to reach basically the whole globe, but with a focus on the more important countries, the G20 countries, basically, that needed their population needed to be swayed in the interest of the CCP leadership. Now, more specifically to the research I'm going to present. We, that is my co-author, Michael Malzer, and I, were posing two interrelated research questions. The first one is, how do certain aspects of official discourses attempt to counter specific allegations? So basically, what can we find in the official media of China that is specifically trying to deflect criticism from China's conduct, China's state actors' conduct within the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region? And then the second question is, how do these formats and forms of foreign-facing propaganda evolve? So we see this as a dynamic process, not just in terms of content, but also in the way that Chinese state media are learning how to more effectively counter these foreign allegations. The basis, the material that we're looking at are English language YouTube videos, videos that have something to do with Xinjiang. So they either have Xinjiang in their headline, or they touch on Xinjiang. So we basically manually screened all the videos and excerpted those, downloaded those that touch on Xinjiang. from 2 public television stations and their YouTube channels, namely the before mentioned China Global Television Network, CGTN, and New China TV, which is basically Xinhua. The period we cover in the final version of this paper is 3 years, 2018, including December 2020. However, and this is where I have to keep your attention for a bit more, in what I'm going to present, the graphs end in September 2020. That's kind of the conference version of the paper. The fully published version, which is due to come out soon, will have the full 3 years covered. There's only going to be very slight differences in the numbers, but so I just state this for to be complete. In the sample that we're looking at here, we included 570 videos. We excluded some according to certain considerations like duplicates and so on. And the total playing time of these videos that we analyze here is more than 75.5 hours. So it's quite a lot of material to work with. And that's also why we split the analysis basically in 2 sections. The first one is that we did open coding. The 2 authors looked at about half of the material separately, and we came up with our own codes. Then we sat together and compared, standardized those codes. And next we applied this new coding scheme or standardized coding scheme to the rest of the material. And this is the basis for our quantitative content analysis. So this is basically the statistics and graphs that I'm going to show you in a bit. Also, we wrote memos on each of the videos that we watched, and those are then the basis for the qualitative discourse analysis. So these are reflections that we had, observations that we made during watching the videos, and they form our fundamental material for the qualitative part. To compare this with other renditions of official discourses, we look also at Chinese government white papers. They are kind of the baseline for comparison, you could say. In the relevant period here, there were 11 Xinjiang-related white papers issued by the Chinese government, so 2002 to 2020. In the meantime, there have been more, but they are outside of this analysis. To end this overview over the data, let me give you an idea of what the sample looks like. 570 videos, even more before we excluded some very lengthy ones. That's a lot, of course. But as you can see, the large majority of these videos is actually pretty short, below 1 minute, 1 minute to 2 minutes, or between 2 and 3 minutes. Yeah? That's the bulk of the videos. Why are there so many short clips? The reason is simple, and it is discussed very openly among Chinese media scholars in their Chinese language publications, which we also looked at. They say shorter clips are more effective in achieving wide distribution on social media channels. So if we want to play the game of modern new social media, then we need a lot of short clips. They will be reposted, they will be shared through all kinds of social media, and that's a very effective strategy to disseminate the message. And then at the very other extreme, you see that there's also quite a bunch of videos that are more than 2 hours long. I'll have to say more on these in a bit, but they include live streams that are very long, very extensive, but as we write it in our paper, low on information density. In other words, they're quite boring. They don't have a lot of content. And so therefore, the most lengthy ones we actually later excluded from the qualitative analysis because they don't deliver much purchase. Okay, so let's get started with the quantitative analysis part. And here we first want to establish the timeline of events. You know that the first allegations about large-scale crackdowns on the Xinjiang minority population, especially the Uyghurs, but also Kazakhs, that there have been mass internments in so-called re-education camps, were beginning in international media in 2017-18, particularly 2018. But as you can see from this graph, whether it's in frequency of videos or length of videos, there was hardly anything in 2018 on the Xinjiang topic. And that has the simple reason that the Chinese government was flatly denying the existence of any re-education camps until October 2018, when they kind of flip-flopped and said through their official spokesperson, there are no re-education camps, but we do have so-called vocational education and training centers in Xinjiang that are supposed to serve as centers of de-radicalization for supposed Islamist extremists. So this is where we have an uptick, but until then it was basically all quiet. More interesting still, there are two big peaks in the reporting on Xinjiang that each of them coincides with legislative action being taken or underway in US Congress. One is November-December 2019, and the second one is in June-July 2020. Those are the times when different versions of a bill that later became known as the US Uyghur Human Rights Act of 2020 were deliberated, first passed by the House, then by the Senate, later bounced between the two, and eventually signed into law by President Trump in June-July 2020. Each of these times we see there's an outburst of more videos that follow a certain tactic, as I'll explain in a bit. And then over the summer of 2020, this is when a lot of new sanctions, economic sanctions, were being listed and published by the United States government. We see that in September, in particular, the propaganda basically pulled out all the stops, and the screening time on Xinjiang goes through the roof. But this is including the many lengthy live broadcasts from Xinjiang, travelogues that are often very low on information. And so, as I said, later on, we excluded them from the analysis. So what's in those reports, and what do they look like from our coding scheme? I here, for simplicity's sake, only refer to the first level of coding. There's the supra categories, so to say, the larger categories. The larger ones are subdivided into more specific categories that I will talk about in more depth in the qualitative section. So the largest one, with 35% by frequency, is actually the so-called development narrative. Development narrative refers to positive stories about how Xinjiang is taking off, mostly economically, but also in other fields. This is followed by Xinjiang policy amplifiers, Xinjiang policy amplifiers, by nature videos, nature and scenery videos, and another big category would be what we call countering criticism. Those are either rebuttals by government spokespersons, so direct rejections of certain claims made by outside forces, or they can be endorsements made by spokespeople on behalf of the Chinese government, so persons who are invited to give talks in China to visit Xinjiang, maybe as part of a foreign delegation, and then they are called upon to speak out on behalf of the government. There's a bunch of criticisms of the US and so on. What you also see, the red part here, 7%, is the so-called terror narrative, which does not look much, but is actually a very important theme in the overall scheme of things. It looks a little bit different when we look at the length of playing time and not the frequency of videos. That's, so to say, the flip side. Both are valid indicators of importance. As I said, short videos are often used to achieve wide dissemination, but of course there's also lengthy videos that explain a lot of background. And you can see, for instance, the divergence between the two. Now it's no longer the development narrative that is the largest, but rather it is the culture category. So culture videos tend to be longer in playing time. Development narrative videos tend to be quite short, often just below 1 minute, and to present one important fact about how Xinjiang in particular is picking up. Now, maybe the most interesting chart of this part is this here, because here we plot the different, only the most important categories actually, across the timeline. And you can see the peaks as in the previous timeline graph, but now you can also see what is being broadcasted, what are the messages that are being put in the foreground. And as I said, November, December was quite hot. That was not just the time that the US Congress was deliberating on the legislation regarding Uyghur human rights protection, but it was also around the time that the China cables and the Xinjiang papers were brought out by two different consortia of news outlets. And of course, that required some sort of response on the part of Chinese state media. And what you see here is that in this heightened episode of contention, as we call it, there is an increased use, in particular, of the so-called terror narrative. So in other periods, the terror narrative does not play such a prominent role. It is mostly during these episodes of heightened contention. You can see this green bar, again, very high and prominent in June 2020. Again, that was when the US President Donald Trump then signed this bill into law. And then towards the end of the period covered here, you see that it's actually development narrative and culture videos that are taking up this huge explosion of content that was brought out in September 2020. So the focus then shifted from portraying Xinjiang as a victim of Islamist terror to presenting the positive impact that China's policies have had until so far on the region. Now, for the maybe more interesting qualitative part of the analysis, which is based on a discourse analysis, now we can look in more depth into what are the messages that are behind these different categories, starting with the development narrative, which is, as I said, very prominent. It's actually an omnipresent idea that Xinjiang is developing well in various lines of development, whether it's economic, social, culturally, or other dimensions. What the development narrative very prominently adheres is a linear idea of progress. So very often you would have comparisons that go back in time and tell you, well, in the beginning of the 1990s, the starting of the reform and opening up period, there was only so much of X or Y, and by now we have a much larger number. Yeah, so that the impression created is everything improves over time, everything is getting more and better. The content is quite variable. It includes very prominently, as the largest subcategory, so to say, infrastructure. There's lots of fantastic aerial views of newly built bridges, of highways, railroads, high voltage power lines, and so on and so forth. A second very prominent theme is poverty alleviation, and in particular, poverty alleviation targeting the south of Xinjiang, where the majority of the Uyghur population lives, or Kazakh inhabited areas in the north of Xinjiang. So this idea that there is progress on the individual level. It's not just these big ticket items of infrastructure that are being built, but individuals in particular from minoritized populations are directly also benefiting from what the government, what the party state actors are doing. But actually the largest category within the development narrative category is personal development stories. And personal development stories we find to be a kind of new feature in this external facing media strategy, with whole series such as Xinjiang My Home or A Rare Look into Xinjiang, devoted entirely to presenting the life stories of individuals from Xinjiang or families from Xinjiang and how they have improved thanks to the policies adopted by the Chinese government. So the idea behind these personal development stories, we argue, is to show that Uyghurs, if they subscribe to mainstream social values such as working hard to improve your life, investing a lot in education, adhering to family values and so on, that they can be brought to a fully developed modern life. And a particularly intriguing part of this these personal development stories is about women's liberation, which is an important trope for legitimizing China's approach to Xinjiang. Women are portrayed as being particularly disadvantaged in Uyghur society, and particularly so among Uyghurs who have been affected by so-called extremism, Islamic extremism, who have been forced to stay at home, become housewives and mothers, not going out to work, not earning their own money, having to wear veils and to cover themselves. So women's liberation is often portrayed in videos that focus on the beauty of Uyghur women, on beautification. There is the archetypal female entrepreneur who is either a barber or a visagist or somebody else in the beauty business, and they make statements in these videos such as, I quote, "As a woman, I have a right to be beautiful," unquote. So this is the extent of women's liberation in the CCP's portrayal. These videos also include, for instance, clips on Uyghurs who have gone to other places, either within Xinjiang or also very prominent in Eastern China, as migrant workers, as parts of government organized labor transfers. Those are directly to counter allegations of forced labor in this field. So they pick up on, and we can show this also from the timing, that they directly pick up on news stories, on important reports by human rights activists and academics on forced labor practices. And then immediately you have a countering video in this line of a personal development story. And we even find that this personal development story format is being picked up later on in government white papers, which are otherwise very dull reading, yeah, and lots of statistics and so on. But this sort of micro framing to look at Xinjiang's development, not just from the perspective of macro statistics, but through the prism of individual life stories, has now also entered into the official government white paper. So you see that the state media and the state council information office, which is bringing out these government white papers, are working hand in glove. The second important category, culture and history, just to bring up a few important subcategories and examples for that. They show, for instance, modern urbanity. Yeah, they do not necessarily represent Xinjiang as backwards, but to the contrary, they show how modern urban centers have developed. They discuss Uyghur hip-hop stars. They show shopping opportunities in shopping malls and so on. So in other ways, showing that Xinjiang is a place in China just basically as developed as the East Coast, or at least as central China. There's another section that is focusing on ethnic culture, where you see how the ethnic other is marked as different, as exotic, similar to what the anthropologist Louisa Schein termed internal Orientalism. So there is an othering of non-Han minoritized populations in Xinjiang. They are represented through their song and dance. That's the standard stereotype about Chinese minorities, that they are good in singing and dancing. But there is also, of course, other aspects such as Uyghur music, the 12 Mukam, or Meshrab community gatherings among Uyghurs that are being presented as a kind of heritage of this particular cultural group. That said, a lot of these videos make a point, a very deliberate point, that Xinjiang is not just a region of the Uyghurs, but in fact, it is a multicultural region. It is a region consisting of multiple ethnicities and has been so for a very long time. And that Islam is also not the only religion in the region, but rather that this is a region of multiple religiosities, and has been so over the past millennia. And what this is basically a rejection of Uyghur claims to be the indigenous minority or the indigenous population of this region. Instead, what we see here is a process of what Svensson and Marx have called heritageization. So cultures from non-Han ethnic groups are being reworked in a heritageization process and made into the cultural heritage of the whole of China, the Zhonghua Minzu, all of the so-called Chinese nation, under the premise of unity in diversity, Doyo and Iti. That is to say, there are multiple ethnic groups with their own local cultures, but they all together form the Chinese nation and the Chinese culture. So whatever happened in Xinjiang at any time back in time would now belong and be subsumed under this category of the Zhonghua Minzu culture. What is prominent in its absence is Islam. At least as far as these 3 years worth of videos, we can say Islam is the big blank spot. It's not represented, even though it is a central element, of course, of not just the Uyghurs culture, but also that of Kazakhs and Kyrgyz and other minority groups in the region. So you do not see hardly anything. You do see hardly anything. The one exception is where Islam is being portrayed as a source of evil, as extremist, and the basic ground for terrorism, but that is part of the terror narrative and not culture and history. Yeah, local food is also very prominent in the representations of minority cultures. You know that food generally has a very dominant role to play in Chinese culture, and that the Chinese place a high importance on experiencing food also when they travel. So this is also a bit of tourism advertising, you could say, to make it palatable in the literal sense for Han Chinese travelers to go to the region, to visit the region and experience it for themselves. Nature and scenery, as I have shown in the quantitative part, do have a large role to play. They do not come across as directly political, of course, but we argue that they have a kind of alternative political lens, and they show us what kind of image of Xinjiang Chinese state media want to project. So I don't want to go into great detail here, but nature plays a very large role in the representation of the region. Not so much the problematic aspects such as ecological problems, rather the opposite, what has been done in order to protect the ecology, set up nature reserves, again, also tourist sites that can be consumed by Han Chinese, presumably Han Chinese tourists who travel to the region. This category includes both the very long, very lengthy live streams and also many short clips that just show the blossoms of trees or aerial views. But there are also specifically devoted series such as Amazing Xinjiang that seek out a certain field sub-region of Xinjiang and then portray it in somewhat greater detail. Now, let's turn to the terror narrative, which, as some authors such as John Roberts have argued, plays a very crucial role in legitimizing what the Chinese government has been doing in the Xinjiang region. And we do subscribe to that importance, even though it does not show so much in the quantitative overview that I've given you. In the quantitative perspective, we argue that the terror narrative comes out most clearly in certain high tides of contestation. But other than that, it is pulled into the background. It's the baseline argument that Xinjiang has been affected badly by terrorism, that itself is an outflow of separatism, national separatism, and religious extremism. Those are the so-called three evils. And the terror narrative further argues that in order to prevent any further terrorist attacks in Xinjiang, the government has taken to preemptive measures of de-radicalization, or more literally, de-extremification of affected populations, that is to say, mostly minoritized populations of Xinjiang, such as Kazakhs and prominently the Uyghurs. The terror narrative, as we understand it, comes out most clearly in the so-called anti-terror documentaries that were published both during these high tides of contestation in late 2019 and in the mid-2020. Those were three, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Those were three terror documentaries that were specifically released to change the narrative in international media to present Xinjiang as a victim of internationally connected extremist groups. These terror documentaries, as we call them, are also discussed in Chinese media journals by media strategists and media scholars. The first two of them actually are admitted to have been quite unsuccessful. The disappointment of the state media and its backers is quite palpable in these publications. In fact, what you see here is the government spokesperson, the foreign ministry spokesperson, Hua Chunying, challenging foreign reporters at her regular press conference. Now, how many of you have watched these videos? How many of you have done their homework, basically, to check out what new perspectives and new information the Chinese government has given you on the real situation in Xinjiang? And she was disappointed to see that hardly anyone of these international journalists showed their hands to say, yes, I've watched it. What was in there were very graphic and actually shocking images of violence, usually taken from closed-circuit televisions, from surveillance cameras that show literally show the explosions or knife attacks that the Chinese government calls terrorist attacks, and that to a common understanding can be also called terrorist attacks in Xinjiang or committed by Uyghurs in other places of China. And that was the first time that the Chinese government had released such footage, very shocking footage, actually so shocking that YouTube then decided to require real name registration to make sure that only overage adult viewers could watch these videos. That, of course, limits the distribution, and the government in China complained about this, that these violent scenes are blocked. And yeah, to be honest, there's a lot of violence to be seen on YouTube, but these particular clips were blocked out, which is kind of a specific treatment meted out to the Chinese state media. And to this lack of uptake by international journalists, the government then reacted by making this the topic of more news items, such as this talk show Below the Point with a prominent news anchor Liu Xin in CGTN, which was devoted 45 minutes of discussion devoted only to the question, why does the West not listen to us? If now we show the real face, the real problems in Xinjiang, and nobody is really taking notice, how can that be? The third video that was released in mid-2020 was more successful, at least as claimed by Chinese media scholars, in reaching a wider distribution and a more positive reception by viewers. But as I said earlier, it did not really change the international conversation about Xinjiang that much. So to summarize what we have found so far in this paper, Chinese state media very deliberately use YouTube, which is, I forgot to mention that in the beginning, of course, blocked for viewers in China. So it's really just put out there for foreign consumption. And they use it to portray Xinjiang primarily through a very positive lens. So development takes a very prominent position. The positive aspects of having multiple cultures, multiple ethnicities living side by side, and for most of the time it is claimed in harmony, the gorgeous nature and scenery, and also, which we find very interesting, Xinjiang is being presented as already well on the way to becoming a secular and a modern society. So what you see, in particular in those personal development videos, we argue is the end result of what the Xinjiang policies try to achieve, namely to assimilate the minoritized populations of Xinjiang to become more like the Han, more like the mainstream of Chinese society in many cultural and socioeconomic respects. The terror narrative is important in that it is being tactically deployed in those critical episodes of contention when the criticism from the West is really almost getting out of hand. It is important throughout as a kind of baseline argument. So in many of the videos that we did not specifically classify as terror narrative, it is an argument in the background. It is the baseline from which progress towards the better is being measured. But this depiction using also violent scenes and acts of terrorism in full display, that is only being more judiciously employed. Moreover, with respect to our second research question, the modes and forms of display, we find that they contain some innovative methods. For instance, there is a very powerful pictorial language of many of these videos. As I said, lots of aerial views, apparently shot by drones. So providing you with really fantastic landscape and scenery. There is quite modern storytelling that dramatizes what is being said. There are the various kinds of personal life stories into which this micro framing is embedded. So, and again, this is something that we can corroborate with Chinese language sources written by media scholars, that this is a deliberate strategy, that the larger story of Xinjiang should be told well, quote unquote, through these individual life stories as a kind of micro framing. And also, not to forget, very innovative is the risky, I would say, display of violence. And the Chinese official media are actually arguing that the government acted with a lot of restraint not to show these violent pictures earlier, because that might have provoked counter-violence against the Uyghurs. So the argument is, we did not show this in order to protect them against retaliation from particularly the Han Chinese. But now, as I showed you in these episodes of contention, these graphic displays of violence are also being used, but as I said, restricted to particular periods. In the final analysis, we would still argue that China's international discourse power is and remains limited. China has not managed to fundamentally overturn the conversation on Xinjiang. That has a lot to do with the dynamics that this conversation has taken. I'll come back to this in a bit. That new allegations are being put forward time and again, and then China is again on the back foot and has to react, and is not proactively shaping the narrative. But that said, I would make a caveat that this is only true or mostly true for Western audiences, and we find a more receptive audience maybe in other non-Western contexts. I'll come back to this in my final conclusion. So in the last part, I want to conclude by looking at the developments that go beyond our current paper and that will be analyzed in subsequent publication. Namely the developments of the past almost 2 years, 2021 and 2022. As I've already hinted at, there are now increased levels of accusations. The genocide allegation that has been made by some official actors, such as the US government and various Western world parliaments. And this, of course, triggered an increase in reactionary counter-propaganda, in rejecting, rebutting these heightened accusations. We see, for instance, the fourth installment of the so-called terror documentaries. This time, the focus is primarily on the so-called two-faced people, so people who are in the government sector working for the state, but have, for some reason or other, made a double play and been trying to help, at least this is the allegation, have tried to help the extremists develop their cause. So this is a new level of fighting terrorism. There was also a new series of documentaries with Liu Xin, the famous news anchor that I showed you earlier, going to Xinjiang and engaging in something that we call myth busting. The myth busting part is something where Chinese state media pick up a certain news story from the West or a paper written by a foreign academic and try to tear it apart, basically, as only made up charges, as complete lies and fabrications and so on. So very specific countering this international media onslaught against China on the topic of Xinjiang. And there have also been other productions, such as the full feature-length movie Wings of Songs, a musical that is very cheesy. If you ever watch it, beware of an all Xinjiang boy group consisting of a Han Chinese lead singer, a Kazakh, and a Uyghur, who of course get along very well and together experience a sort of road trip back to their home region and finding their roots and so on. So it is a very positive portrayal of modern day youth in Xinjiang. It's very, very tame in terms of how even, you know, intersexual relations are being portrayed. So it's good family cinema, you could say. And the music that's very striking has hardly anything to do with Uyghur music. So it's really Han Chinese pop music that is on display. Other developments is that a strategy that we have observed earlier, namely borrowing foreign mouths to speak, is now being conducted at a new level. It is intensified. Borrowing foreign mouths to speak means that you invite non-Chinese faces, either Western or non-Western, that doesn't really matter, to endorse China's policies in Xinjiang or counter accusations by its critics and media that are only on the fringe of the Western media or international media, such as Gray Zone, are being presented here as kind of the counterweight to the big hegemonic media outlets, let's say CNN, BBC, and so on. Another interesting tweak is that borrowing foreign mouths to speak now also includes non-official spokespeople, such as YouTubers, who are apparently doing this for themselves or for the greater good of the public. So not for public, not for the earning money or for going into business, commercial advertisements, but simply doing this for themselves. In how far these YouTubers are actually independent and remain so, that's a big debate, and it certainly also differs from case to case. We can go into that in more detail if you like in the Q&A. But it's interesting in the sense in that it allows Chinese media to bring across essentially the same message through a third party that is seen as more authentic and more trustworthy than CGTN or New China TV itself. And finally, to conclude, the fight over discourse hegemony continues. It's not over yet. There's a lot of back and forth in this field that we observe, and China, and I would argue, is not yet very successful in countering US and Western, sorry for the typo, Western European perspectives on Xinjiang. But I hasten to add that we shouldn't forget that these portrayals of Xinjiang as a successful case of countering terrorism and extremism may find a better reception in other parts of the world. So we shouldn't be sanguine about it. So with that, I'd like to conclude with this picture of Han-Chinese Uyghur collaboration in lighting the Olympic torch in the Olympic flame, sorry, in Beijing in earlier in 2022. which was, of course, another display of the benign relationship between Han and minority peoples of Xinjiang. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for this fabulous talk.